There's something oddly comforting about being completely, utterly lost. Not the kind of lost where you're panicking in a dark alley at 2 a.m., checking your phone battery percentage every 30 seconds. I'm talking about the good kind of lost. The kind where you've wandered so far off your intended path that you've stumbled into something unexpectedly beautiful. I discovered this by accident last Tuesday. Well, I suppose that's the only way you can discover being lost, isn't it? By accident. I was supposed to meet my friend Sarah for coffee at our usual spot downtown, but I got off the subway one stop too early. Instead of immediately checking Google Maps like any sensible person would do, I decided to walk, just walk, and see where I ended up. That's how I found myself standing in front of a tiny bookstore I'd never noticed before, despite living in this city for 7 years. The kind of place that looks like it was transplanted directly from a different era. Hand-painted sign, books stacked in the windows so haphazardly that they seemed to defy gravity, and a cat sleeping peacefully on a pile of what looked like first-edition poetry collections. The owner, an elderly woman with silver hair twisted into a messy bun, secured with what appeared to be a chopstick, looked up from her crossword puzzle and smiled. "Looking for anything particular?" she asked, and I realized I wasn't. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't looking for anything particular at all. This is the problem with modern life, isn't it? We're always looking for something particular. The fastest route to work, the most efficient workout routine, the perfect restaurant for date night, the ideal career move. We've optimized ourselves into a corner where spontaneity feels almost revolutionary. I spent 2 hours in that bookstore, which I later learned was called Chapter and Verse, and had been there for 43 years. The owner, Eleanor, told me stories about the neighborhood, about the famous writer who used to come in every Thursday to read his work aloud to whoever would listen, about the couple who met while reaching for the same book and got married 6 months later. Books have a way of bringing people together, Eleanor said, reorganizing a shelf that looked perfectly fine to me, but you have to slow down enough to let them work their magic. Slowing down. When was the last time any of us actually slowed down? Not stopped. We're forced to stop all the time. Red lights, elevator waits, loading screens, but actually chose to slow down, to meander, to let our attention drift where it wanted to go, instead of dragging it back to our endless to-do lists. I think about this as I walk to work now, taking a slightly different route each day. Not because I'm trying to optimize my commute or discover hidden shortcuts, but because I want to stay a little bit lost. I want to maintain that sense of possibility that comes with not knowing exactly what's around the next corner. Yesterday, it was a community garden tucked between 2 apartment buildings where an old man was teaching a group of kids how to plant tomatoes. The day before, it was a mural I'd never seen before, painted on the side of a building that I must have passed 100 times without really seeing it. Each small discovery feels like finding money in an old jacket pocket, unexpected and disproportionately delightful. But here's what's interesting. The more comfortable I've become with being literally lost, the more I've realized how metaphorically lost I've been for years. Lost in the sense that I stopped paying attention to what I actually wanted, as opposed to what I thought I should want. Lost in the sense that I'd been moving through life on autopilot, checking boxes and meeting expectations without really asking myself if this was the path I wanted to be on. It's easy to stay on autopilot. The algorithm knows what you like, your calendar app knows where you need to be, your GPS knows the fastest way to get there. We've created systems so efficient at predicting our needs and desires that we barely need to think about them anymore. But somewhere in all that efficiency, we've lost something essential: the experience of discovering what we actually want by stumbling across things we didn't know existed. I started thinking about this differently after I met Marcus. He runs a small cafe about 6 blocks from where I live, in a direction I never had reason to walk before I started my daily wanderings. The first time I found his place, I was following a particularly interesting-looking dog who seemed to know where he was going. The dog led me to Marcus's cafe, where his owner was waiting with a coffee and a knowing smile. "Benny's brought another one," Marcus called out to the dog's owner, a woman about my age with paint-stained fingers and laugh lines that suggested she spent a lot of time genuinely amused by life. "He's got good taste," she replied. "This place serves the best coffee in a 6-block radius." "Only coffee shop in a 6-block radius," Marcus corrected with a grin, "but we'll take the compliment." That was 3 weeks ago, and I've been back almost every day since. Not because it's convenient, it adds 15 minutes to my morning routine, but because Marcus remembers that I like my coffee black and asks about the book I'm reading. Because the woman with paint-stained fingers, whose name is Andrea and who turns out to be a local artist, always has interesting stories about the neighborhood's history. Because there's something irreplaceable about becoming a regular somewhere, about being known in a small corner of a big city. This is what we lose when we optimize everything: the chance encounters, the inefficient conversations, the detours that become destinations. We lose the possibility of serendipity, of those moments when life surprises us with exactly what we didn't know we needed. I've been thinking about serendipity a lot lately, how it requires a certain amount of space, physical space to wander, mental space to notice, emotional space to be open to whatever comes up. But space has become a luxury in modern life. Our physical spaces are optimized for efficiency. Our mental space is cluttered with notifications and obligations. Our emotional space is often too full of anxiety about the future or regret about the past to leave room for present moment wonder. The paradox is that we have more access to information, entertainment, and connection than any generation in human history, but we often feel more lost than ever. Lost in the existential sense, uncertain about our purpose, our values, our place in the world. Maybe this is because we've become so good at finding our way that we've forgotten how to let ourselves be found. Eleanor, the bookstore owner, put it beautifully when I visited again last week. People come in here looking for the next book in a series they're reading, or the book their book club selected, or the book that's trending on social media, she said, restocking the poetry section. But the books that change people's lives are usually the ones they weren't looking for. The ones they pick up while waiting for me to find the book they came in for. This makes me think about all the things I've been actively searching for: the perfect job, the ideal relationship, the right apartment, the correct life choices, and wonder what I might be missing while I'm so focused on finding them. What opportunities am I walking past because they don't match the criteria I've set for what I think I want? There's a concept in psychology called the paradox of choice. The idea that having too many options can actually make us less happy and more anxious. But I think there's another paradox at play here, the paradox of searching. The more specifically we search for something, the less likely we are to find the thing we actually need. This doesn't mean we should abandon all goals and plans and wander aimlessly through life, hoping that good things will happen to us. But maybe it means we should hold our plans a little more lightly, leave a little more room for improvisation, and trust that sometimes the best way to find what we're looking for is to stop looking quite so hard. I've started incorporating this philosophy into other areas of my life. Instead of spending Sunday afternoons scrolling through restaurant reviews to find the perfect place for dinner, I pick a direction and walk until I find somewhere that looks interesting. Instead of researching the optimal workout routine, I try different classes and activities until I find something that makes me forget I'm exercising. Instead of agonizing over the perfect weekend plans, I make loose suggestions and see where the day takes me. This approach doesn't always work out perfectly. Last weekend, my decision to see where the day takes me resulted in getting caught in a rainstorm without an umbrella and ending up in a mediocre diner that definitely wouldn't have made it onto any best of lists. But even that became a good story. And I had an interesting conversation with the waitress about her night classes and her dream of becoming a nurse. Perfect is overrated anyway. Perfect is predictable. Perfect leaves no room for surprise, for growth, for the kind of happy accidents that make life interesting. Perfect is the enemy of good enough, and good enough is often more than enough. I think about this when I see people on the subway, everyone staring at their phones, following the blue dot on their maps to their precisely predetermined destinations. I wonder what they're missing while they're so focused on where they're going. What conversations, what sights, what moments of unexpected beauty are passing them by while they're making sure they don't miss their stops. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for complete chaos or suggesting we should never plan anything. Planning has its place. GPS is genuinely useful when you're running late for an important meeting. Restaurant reviews can help you avoid food poisoning, but somewhere between complete chaos and complete control, there's a sweet spot where life gets interesting. That sweet spot is where I found chapter and verse, where I met Eleanor and Marcus and Andrea. It's where I discovered that I actually enjoy trying new coffee shops and that I have strong opinions about how bookstores should be organized. Spoiler alert, they shouldn't be, not too much anyway. It's where I learned that I'm happier when I'm a little bit lost, a little bit uncertain about what comes next. The funny thing is, I never did make it to that coffee date with Sarah. By the time I emerged from Eleanor's bookstore, it was 3 hours later, and Sarah had long since given up on me. But when I called to apologize and told her about my adventure, she said something that stuck with me. That sounds so much better than sitting in our usual place complaining about our jobs again. She was right. Our usual coffee dates had become a kind of ritual of mutual dissatisfaction, a weekly opportunity to rehearse our grievances and reinforce our sense that we were both stuck in lives that weren't quite what we wanted. Not that there's anything wrong with venting to friends. Sometimes you need that release. But somewhere along the way, our friendship had gotten stuck in a loop of familiar complaints and comfortable pessimism. Now, Sarah and I meet in different places, and we've made a rule. No complaining for the first 15 minutes. We have to start by sharing something interesting we've noticed or experienced since we last saw each other. It's a small change, but it's shifted the entire tone of our friendship. Instead of bonding over what's wrong with our lives, we're bonding over what's interesting about them. This is another thing I've learned from getting comfortable with being lost. It changes not just how you see the world, but how you talk about it. When you're actively noticing new things, you have new things to share. When you're open to small adventures, you have small stories to tell. When you're less focused on optimizing your life, you're more likely to actually enjoy it. I realize this might sound naive or privileged, this celebration of wandering and inefficiency. Not everyone has the luxury of getting off at the wrong subway stop and wandering around for hours. Not everyone can afford to take scenic routes or try random restaurants or spend afternoons in bookstores. Economic anxiety, family responsibilities, health issues, and countless other factors can make embracing uncertainty feel less like an adventure and more like a threat. But I think there are small ways to cultivate this mindset, regardless of your circumstances. It might mean taking a different path through the grocery store and noticing products you've never seen before. It might mean having a conversation with the person behind you in line instead of scrolling through your phone. It might mean saying yes to an invitation you would normally decline or trying a recipe without looking up reviews first. or reading a book someone recommends without researching it thoroughly. The point isn't to completely abandon structure and planning. It's to leave room for serendipity within whatever structure you need to make your life work. It's about staying curious and open to possibility, even in small ways, even when life feels overwhelming or predetermined. Getting lost, it turns out, isn't really about geography. It's about attention. It's about being present enough to notice when something unexpected crosses your path, and flexible enough to follow it, even if it wasn't part of the plan. It's about trusting that not all good things can be searched for, that some of the best discoveries happen when we're not looking, that sometimes the most direct path isn't the most interesting one. As I write this, I'm sitting in Marcus's cafe, watching the morning regulars come and go, listening to Eleanor, who stops by every Thursday for a cappuccino and a chat, tell Andrea about a new shipment of books she's expecting. These people, this place, this routine that isn't really a routine because it leaves room for surprises. None of this would have happened if I hadn't missed my subway stop that Tuesday morning. But let me tell you about another discovery that came from embracing this philosophy of productive lostness. About 2 weeks after my bookstore adventure, I was walking home from work through a neighborhood I'd never really explored. The sun was setting in that particular way it does in early autumn, casting everything in golden light that makes even the most ordinary street corners look like something out of a movie. I was following my nose, literally. There was this incredible smell of garlic and herbs wafting from somewhere nearby. It led me to a narrow alley I'd never noticed before, where I found a tiny restaurant that couldn't have seated more than 20 people. The sign was in Italian, and through the window I could see an elderly man in a flour-dusted apron rolling out pasta by hand. This wasn't some trendy new place that would end up on Instagram food accounts. This was the kind of family-run establishment that survives on neighborhood loyalty and word-of-mouth recommendations. The kind of place you'd walk past 1,000 times without noticing if you weren't deliberately paying attention. I almost kept walking. The rational part of my brain started its usual calculations. I didn't have a reservation. I was dressed too casually. I hadn't checked the reviews. I didn't know what kind of food they served beyond Italian. I couldn't even pronounce the name of the restaurant, but then I remembered Eleanor's words about the books that change people's lives being the ones they weren't looking for. The pasta that night was transcendent, not because it was the most technically perfect dish I'd ever eaten, but because of the context, the discovery, the risk, the conversations with the owner's son, who doubled as the waiter and told me stories about his grandmother's recipes. By the time I left, 3 hours later, I felt like I'd been invited into someone's home rather than simply fed at a restaurant. That experience got me thinking about how much of life we miss when we rely too heavily on other people's opinions and recommendations. Yelp reviews, TripAdvisor ratings, Google stars. These systems are designed to help us make informed decisions, but they also create a kind of tunnel vision where we only see what's already been seen and approved by others. There's something to be said for trusting your own judgment, for developing your own taste instead of outsourcing it to the crowd. When you stumble upon something yourself, when you take the risk of trying it without the safety net of other people's validation, the experience becomes uniquely yours in a way that feels increasingly rare. This principle started spilling over into other areas of my life. Instead of asking my friends for restaurant recommendations, I began exploring neighborhoods and letting my curiosity guide me. Instead of only reading books that were trending or highly rated, I started picking up novels based on their covers or first lines, poetry collections because I liked the author's name, non-fiction books about subjects I knew nothing about. Some of these experiments were failures, of course. I've sat through mediocre meals, struggled through boring books, attended events that were poorly organized and not worth the time. But even the failures taught me something about my own preferences, about what I do and don't enjoy, about the difference between things that are objectively good and things that are good for me. And then there were the unexpected successes, like the evening I attended a lecture about urban beekeeping simply because the poster looked interesting. I knew nothing about bees, had no particular interest in agriculture, but something about the hand-drawn illustration caught my eye. 2 hours later, I was fascinated by the complex social structures of bee colonies and had signed up to volunteer at a local community garden that maintained several hives. Or the Saturday afternoon, I wandered into a pottery studio that was having an open house. I'd never worked with clay in my life, but the instructor was patient and encouraging, and there was something deeply satisfying about shaping something beautiful with my hands. 6 months later, I'm taking weekly classes and have a shelf full of slightly lopsided but personally meaningful bowls and mugs. These experiences have taught me that expertise isn't a prerequisite for enjoyment. You don't have to be good at something to find value in it. You don't have to understand something completely to appreciate it. Sometimes the best experiences come from approaching something with genuine curiosity and no expectations of mastery. This has been particularly liberating in an age where we're constantly told we need to optimize everything, to become more efficient, to hack our way to better versions of ourselves. The pottery classes aren't making me more productive or advancing my career. The beekeeping knowledge isn't directly applicable to my daily life. But both activities have enriched my life in ways I couldn't have predicted or planned for. I think there's a difference between being lost in the productive sense, open to discovery, willing to follow interesting tangents, and being lost in the destructive sense, genuinely uncertain about your values, goals, or direction. The former can lead to growth and unexpected joy. The latter can lead to anxiety and paralysis. The key seems to be having some kind of foundation, some core sense of who you are and what matters to you, while remaining flexible about how those values express themselves in the world. It's like improvisation in jazz. The musicians have a deep understanding of musical theory and structure, but they use that knowledge as a launching pad for spontaneous creativity rather than a rigid rule book. I've been thinking about this balance a lot, especially as I watch my friends navigate their careers and relationships. There's tremendous pressure in our culture to have everything figured out, to know exactly what you want, and pursue it with single-minded determination. But life is messier and more unpredictable than that linear narrative suggests. My friend Jake, for instance, spent years pursuing a career in finance because it seemed like the responsible, logical choice. He was good with numbers, the pay was decent, his parents approved. But he was miserable, and it took him years to admit that the path he'd chosen so deliberately wasn't actually leading anywhere he wanted to go. His moment of productive lostness came when he got laid off during a company restructuring. Instead of immediately jumping into another similar job, he took some time to figure out what he actually enjoyed doing. He started volunteering at an animal shelter, partly because he'd always loved dogs, but mostly because he needed something to fill his time. That volunteer work led to a part-time job at a veterinary clinic, which led to him going back to school for veterinary technology, which led to a career that pays less than finance, but makes him genuinely excited to get up in the morning. None of this was part of his original plan, but it was the result of being open to possibility when his original plan fell apart. Stories like Jake's make me wonder how many people are trapped in lives they've optimized for the wrong variables. maximizing salary instead of satisfaction, choosing stability over growth, following paths that made sense at one point but no longer serve them. It takes courage to admit when you're lost in the destructive sense, when the map you've been following isn't taking you where you actually want to go. But there's also something hopeful about Jake's story, about the idea that it's never too late to change direction, to try something new, to let yourself be surprised by what you discover when you stop forcing a particular outcome. His career change wasn't the result of a master plan. It was the result of staying open to possibility during a period of uncertainty. This openness to possibility is something I see in the people I've met through my wanderings. Eleanor, the bookstore owner, told me she never intended to run a bookstore. She was an English teacher for 30 years, but when she retired, she found herself restless and looking for a new way to stay connected to books and literature. The bookstore was supposed to be a temporary project, something to keep her busy during her first year of retirement. That was over a decade ago. Marcus, the cafe owner, has a similar story. He was a software engineer who started roasting coffee as a hobby, sharing beans with friends and co-workers. When people kept telling him his coffee was better than anything they could buy in stores, he started thinking about opening his own place. The cafe began as a weekend side project and gradually grew into his full-time passion. Andrea, the artist, spent years working in marketing while painting on evenings and weekends. She never thought she could make a living from her art until a friend convinced her to show some pieces at a local gallery. One thing led to another, and now she supports herself through a combination of commissions, teaching, and selling work at local markets. What strikes me about all these stories is how non-linear they are, how much they depend on chance encounters, gradual transitions, and the willingness to follow interesting opportunities even when they don't fit into a predetermined plan. None of these people knew exactly where they were headed when they started. They just kept moving in directions that felt right and stayed alert to new possibilities. This is so different from the narrative we're often told about success, which emphasizes goal setting, strategic planning, and relentless pursuit of specific outcomes. Those approaches have their place, but they can also create a kind of tunnel vision that makes us miss opportunities that don't fit our predetermined categories. I think about this tension a lot in my own life. I have goals and ambitions, things I'm working toward deliberately. But I also try to leave space for serendipity, for the unexpected connections and opportunities that come from being present and engaged with the world around me. It's like the difference between being a tourist and being a traveler. Tourists have itineraries, maps, predetermined lists of must-see attractions. Travelers have a general sense of direction, but remain open to detours, recommendations from locals, experiences that aren't in the guidebooks. Both approaches can lead to memorable trips, but they tend to produce very different kinds of memories. The tourist gets to see all the famous sights, take all the classic photos, check all the boxes. The traveler might miss some of the important landmarks, but come home with stories about conversations with strangers, meals in hole-in-the-wall restaurants, unexpected discoveries in forgotten neighborhoods. I'm not arguing that one approach is better than the other, but I think most of us default to tourist mode in our daily lives. We follow the established routes, visit the recommended places, make the sensible choices. We optimize for efficiency and certainty, which serves us well in many contexts, but can also make life feel predictable and somewhat hollow. What I've discovered through my experiments in getting lost is that traveler mode, approaching life with curiosity rather than a checklist, tends to produce richer experiences and more interesting stories. It also tends to put you in contact with more diverse people and perspectives, which can be valuable in ways you don't expect. Take the community garden where I volunteer with the beekeeping project. I never would have sought out this experience deliberately, but it's introduced me to people from completely different backgrounds and life experiences. There's Maria, a retired nurse who grows vegetables for her large extended family. David, a college student studying environmental science who's passionate about sustainable agriculture. Janet, a local business owner who finds gardening therapeutic after stressful workdays. These relationships are different from my usual friend group, less based on shared interests or similar life circumstances, more based on a shared commitment to this particular place and project. The conversations are different too, more grounded in practical concerns and less abstract than the discussions I typically have with people in my professional or social circles. There's something valuable about having connections that exist outside your normal bubble. Relationships that challenge your assumptions and expose you to different ways of thinking about the world. These chance encounters and unexpected friendships are another form of productive lostness, letting yourself be surprised by who you connect with when you venture outside your familiar social territories. The challenge, of course, is finding the time and energy for this kind of exploration when life is already full of obligations and responsibilities. Work deadlines, family commitments, household tasks, social obligations. There's always something that needs to be done, some efficient path that needs to be followed. But I've found that the key isn't necessarily to carve out huge blocks of time for wandering and exploration. Sometimes it's as simple as choosing to walk a different route, striking up a conversation with someone you normally wouldn't talk to, saying yes to an invitation that doesn't seem like your usual thing. Small detours can lead to big discoveries. The 5 minutes you spend reading bulletin board announcements while waiting for your coffee might introduce you to a new activity or community group. The conversation you have with your neighbor while walking your dog might reveal shared interests you never knew about. The book you pick up randomly at the library might change how you think about something important. The cumulative effect of these small adventures is significant. Over time, they expand your sense of what's possible, what you enjoy, who you are. They create a life that feels more textured and interesting than one that follows only the most direct paths between predetermined destinations. That's the thing about getting lost. You never know what you're going to find until you find it. And sometimes, what you find is exactly what you didn't know you were looking for. Sometimes, it's a bookstore that becomes your sanctuary, a cafe that becomes your community, a hobby that becomes your passion. Sometimes, it's simply a reminder that the world is bigger and more interesting than your daily routine might suggest, and that you're more curious and capable of growth than you might have realized. The art of getting lost, it turns out, is really the art of staying found, staying connected to your curiosity, your openness, your willingness to be surprised by life. It's about trusting that not everything good can be planned or optimized, that some of the best experiences require a little bit of uncertainty, a willingness to venture into the unknown and see what reveals itself. As I finish writing this, sitting in Marcus's cafe with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, I realize that this piece itself is a kind of getting lost. I started with one idea and let it wander where it wanted to go, following tangents and associations rather than sticking to a rigid outline. It feels more honest this way, more true to the actual experience of discovery than a more structured approach would have been. And maybe that's the ultimate lesson. Sometimes the best way to find what you're looking for is to stop looking quite so hard and trust that life has interesting things to show you if you're willing to pay attention and follow where they lead.